Hi, my name is Juan Paredes. I'm running for Congress in Florida's 26th Congressional District, and this is my domestic policy gauntlet. First, I want to talk about Medicare for All. So, I personally have lived most of my life in deep poverty. So, I've lived without any kind of healthcare at all for a very long time. And so healthcare is very important to the fabric of our society to make sure that people can get care when they need it, as you know, without having to go into debt or bankruptcy. And I fully support Bernie Sanders' version of Medicare for All. I like the provisions in it which prevent the private institutions to create duplicative services that Bernie Sanders Medicare for All supplies people with. So that means if, for example, there's a treatment that you can only have through Bernie's Medicare for All plan, you cannot get that same treatment from a different private healthcare system. And this actually provides better care because private healthcare systems are their motivation is profit. So what they will do is they will take losses in the long term, in the short term, to have profits in the long term, and they would use other incentive structures that would provide people with less care to move them away from a public healthcare system. And if more people are like for example, giving you returns on unused care, for example, and if people are not paying into the public healthcare system, then it won't have the funds necessary to provide everyone with care. So this way, if a private healthcare system wants to provide auxiliary services that aren't covered in Bernie Sanders' healthcare plan, that is perfectly okay. And this restriction allows us to have as many people as possible in one healthcare system. That way, we can have the funding necessary to provide care to people at the lowest cost possible and make care free at the time of service. So Bernie Sanders' healthcare plan is in my opinion the best way for us to get healthcare, and it's not even as radical as some of other countries' healthcare plans, like the UK, for example, has a completely nationalized healthcare system with nationalized hospitals and doctors. So this is a lot more moderate than some of the more radical things, but it is definitely the best thing that this country, in terms of healthcare plan, has been proposed as of yet, but not actually implemented. Like the most progressive implemented healthcare plan has been the ACA as of so far, but we can do far better than the ACA. The ACA is a mandated private healthcare system. So I fully support Medicare for All of Bernie's proposal, and when I'm in office, I'll do everything I can to make sure that we fight for that healthcare plan to make sure that everybody has healthcare at the lowest cost possible. And so now I want to talk about the Clean Water Act. When it comes to the Clean Water Act, we actually have fairly decent regulations when it comes to clean water. Flint, Michigan was an extraneous case, and it is and there are a lot of criminal charges being placed because of it. Of course, the enforcement isn't enough to justify the injustices that were done and the extreme level of incompetence, and also the investigation is showing that there was a cover up from Flint, Michigan. So there's a lot of things that went wrong with Flint, Michigan. But in terms of our regulation, we have fairly decent standards for water quality and having proper regulation for pollution point sources. But we can do a lot better. The EPA provides states with permits to have point sources of pollution that are necessary. And because of the bureaucracy, a lot of those permits essentially bought for by corporations, which shouldn't have those permits because they're very damaging to our environment. So one thing I would really support is having a more strenuous and arduous process to getting those permits, and having a system that ensures that the point sources of pollution that are provided with these EPA permits aren't going to be particularly damaging to our environment, and only issued on cases that are necessary for the functioning of our society. But otherwise, in general, the Clean Water Act does have fairly decent standards and for water quality. And now I want to talk about ICE and immigration. When it comes to ICE, ICE is actually comprised of two primary components. It's the Homeland Security investigations and enforcement and removal operations. When it comes to Homeland Security investigations, I am definitely in support of Homeland Security having the necessary tools to be able to investigate possible threats to our national security. But the largest issue with ICE is the enforcement removal operations, which is essentially working which is working federally within different state territories to remove people offending the crime of being here illegally, which, keep in mind, is considered a misdemeanor in our legal system. So it's not a very strict crime. Yeah, there's no other additional crime they have done. It's just being here illegally, and then they also get locked up for it, which is inhumane. When it comes to ICE, I would definitely support keeping Homeland Security investigations as part of ICE, but removing the enforcement and removal operations, as they're very very draconian and also it's very cruel to basically very, very vulnerable people coming here seeking a better life. And the enforcement removal operations are essentially the specific problem with ICE, not necessarily the organization as a whole. So I do think it's possible to reform. But we just have to be clear on where the problems lie. And now I want to talk about amnesty for legal immigrants as well. When it comes to amnesty, I do support amnesty. There's, by the most accurate estimations, about 11 million undocumented workers in the United States. And a lot of those workers come, like I said before, coming here to seek a better life. Very little of them are coming here to cause any kind of harm, if any of them at all. I would definitely support amnesty. And beyond amnesty for those undocumented workers, I would also like to improve the process for becoming a documented citizen as well. Like the primary reason it takes so long is because we have an arbitrary limit on amount of green cards we give out, and the limit is about 7%. And also, there's a secondary limit that 7% of those green cards can only come from one country. So it makes it very, very difficult for people to get green cards, and it's a long waiting process. And we even have long processes for asylum, which is against the Geneva Convention as well. The process for becoming a citizen has to be more efficient and has to allow for people to become citizens a lot faster. But I do also support amnesty for those who are undocumented right now within the United States. And next, I want to talk about codifying Roe v. Wade. I've personally known people who've made the horrible decision of having to go through this process, and it's not a decision that people take lightly, and it's not something that people want to do when it comes to getting abortions. It's something because people do it mostly because it's necessary. And making abortions illegal is not going to take away the necessity. It's just going to put two lives at risk when people try to do unsafe practices and trying to perform abortions themselves, or find people who don't have the necessary supplies or the necessary skills, because it's unregulated. Since it's basically illegal, they have to find people who aren't skilled and regulated actors to do the abortion. So getting rid of Roe v. Wade would be disastrous. It would harm a lot more people than it would help. And it's a very, very reactionary policy to something that no one necessarily supports abortion. They support people's right to have one if it's necessary, which there are many reasons why it'd be necessary. So I definitely do support codifying Roe v. Wade and taking it away from the Supreme Court's decision and making it a law by Congress. That way, it can't be undermined by conservative states and other politicians trying to remove Roe v. Wade and put many people's lives in danger. and the only way to ensure that people's right to have abortions is protected is by having it as a law enacted by Congress rather than the decision of the Supreme Court. So now I want to talk about saving the United States Post Office and public banking. The United States Post Office is one of the longest and most treasured institutions that we've created in the United States. It is a promise to be able to deliver mail from anywhere you are within the United States, whether you're on the tallest mountain or in the most isolated desert. As long as you have a verified address within the United States, you will get mail from the USPS. And no other country has any kind of mailing system as robust as this, at least not for a public mailing system. So I definitely think an institution like the USPS has to be protected. They have unfair burdens that are placed upon them, requiring them to secure benefits for 70 years into the future of their workers, which is not even a burden that corporations have to face, and also expecting profit rather than what's most important from USPS, which is the service that they provide, is also a detriment to our society as well. And the extreme debt is essentially used as a argument to cut and to remove USPS, which would basically isolate a lot of very, very remote places that wouldn't get mail otherwise from any other service, or if they do get mail, it would be at extremely high prices. So I would definitely do everything in my power to ensure that USPS continues as an institution. And on top of that, also, I would support having a public bank for states and providing ATMs within the USPS buildings, so that way they could be accessed as express services for the public bank for states, and have a more fair system for financials. Private banks, they provide a decent service, but they have extremely high interest rates, and they have extremely extraneous processes for loans that actually inhibit innovation. It doesn't allow people who have good ideas to secure a loan for sometimes very arbitrary reasons. Just for example, like the area they're in, even if they can provide justification for the loan, even if they have the right income, the area they're in can play a part in whether they get the loan or not. And I think that with a public bank system, we'll have a lot more fair interest rates for people who want to start businesses and for people who need loans for houses, and they'll be able to secure loans at a much better pace, as long as they can provide justification for that loan, and there would be a lot less arbitrary reasons for people not to be able to start a business.